Chapter 6, Into the Depths of History. Arcame, Academy of the Wise Men. In 1952, satellites sent back to Earth photographs of several unusual circles clearly delineated on the surface of the southern Ural steppe, Steppe. No one doubted that these circles had been artificially produced, though nobody could say exactly what they were. A debate was raging in both scientific and occult circles of the time as to where one should look for the original Indo-European homeland. Not without some justification, scientists posited that the many European peoples, as well as those of India, Persia, and parts of Asia, could be traced back to a single source, a mystery people known as Proto-Indo-Europeans. Many researchers have dreamt of finding the remains of the land where once lived the legendary white Aryan race. Researchers have been attempting to reach the fringes of the lost ancient and precious knowledge which the ancient Aryans possessed. Aryans. When excavations began in the Arcame Valley, archaeologists announced to the academic world that an ancient city dating back more than 40 centuries had been unearthed, and it had been inhabited by people of the ancient Indo-European civilization. The researchers started calling Arcame a city, a temple, and an observatory, all at the same time. Arcame, pronounced Archaim, located in the Chelyabinsk Oblast of Russia, near the border of Kazakhstan. For further information on Arcame, see Gennady B. Zdanovich, Arcame Archaeological Park, a cultural ecological reserve in Russia. Chapter 20 in Peter G. Stone and Philip G. Planel, The Constructed Past, Experimental Archaeology, Education and the Public, Oxford, New York. Routledge, 1999. Pages 283 through 291. The researchers started calling Arcame a city, a temple, and an observatory all at the same time. Whoever is interested in the academics' hypotheses can read about them in specialized literature on the subject. I shall pass on what Anastasia's grandfather told me about Arcame. The logic of his thinking is much more accurate and intriguing than the logic underlying the scholar's scientific hypotheses. He stated right off, Arcame is not a city and not a temple. The part about the observatory is true, but that's not the main thing here. Arcame is an academy. That's what it would be called today. It was in Arcame that the teachers of the wise men lived and worked. Here they engaged in research on the universe. They also determined the interrelationship of celestial bodies and their influence on man. Their tremendous discoveries were never recorded, nor did they make long speeches in public. Through their many years of research, they worked out the rites, presented them to people, and subsequently kept track of how effective they were. They made corrections as required. They were able to sum up their lengthy researches into a brief word or two, which signified the substance of their discovery. For example, there are some very early rites, such as the Savior of the Honey on the 14th of July, and the Savior of the Apple on the 19th of July. Footnote, Savior of the Honey Feast Day, a Russian Orthodox Church holiday, actually celebrated August 14th to mark the beginning of the Assumption Fast. New gatherings of honey are brought to churches on that day for blessing before sharing with parishioners. Savior of the Apple Feast Day a church holiday coinciding with the Transfiguration Day celebrated at the midpoint of the Assumption Day, actually August 19th. On this day, farmers take grapes to churches or, in their place, apples from the new crop. People did not use any new crop apples until the savior of the apple feast, or any new gatherings of honey until the honey feast. Through their lengthy researches and observations, the wise men discovered that up until this date, the apple does not give any significant benefit to man, even if it is ripe. And this goes far beyond just the apple. Many berries, edible herbs, and root vegetables beneficial to man ripen before the apple feast. If man begins to eat apples too soon, he would not have room left for the produce that was more beneficial to him at this very time. It was these wise men who discovered that the particular sequence of fruit and vegetable ripening in nature is no mere coincidence. It is this very sequence that constitutes man's divine dietary regime, which the science of the centuries to follow would be searching for in vain. Volumes of treatises could be written about how they conducted their research. These wise men, however, never compiled any and did not burden people with the task of reading them. They imparted their conclusions to people in ready-made form, in just a few words. And people believed the wise men. Their advice invariably proved true in life. Besides, there is no comparison between the Vedras wise men and their counterparts in Greece, the Egyptian priests, or today's acclaimed academic lights. The Vedras wise men never received any honors or rewards for their remarkable discoveries. They could not accumulate wealth or power that, say, the Egyptian priests enjoyed. And they were not given the kind of adoration showered upon many in church hierarchies today. The only thing a wise man could expect upon arriving at a certain settlement was food and any replacement clothing or footwear that he might need, as well as a place where he could lay his head, though some wise men might decline the offer of shelter in favor of sleeping under the stars in the open air. Beyond that, he enjoyed the people's sincere, unfeigned respect. Over the centuries, such an arrangement ensured the selection of only the best teachers and thinkers among the people. The receptive populace also showed their gratitude by building, according to the wise men's own designs, complexes like archaeum, where the wise men could retreat for meditation and a mutual sharing of thoughts. Here they would tell each other of their discoveries and describe the rites that they had come up with based on their discoveries. It was something on the order of a supreme academic council. Most of the time, ordinary people didn't even know who was behind any given rite or whom they had to thank for a particularly insightful and effective rite. Most of the time, there was one wise man, for example, an acclaimed philosopher, astronomer, and psychologist, who devoted 90 years to the study of how to combat the phenomenon we know today as telogyny. He discovered a cure and offered people an effective remedy consisting of a rite of only 15 minutes in duration. True, the preparation for the rite took a lot longer. Why don't you ask Anastasia, Vladimir? She might tell you about it. Only I'll say right off, this rite can be felt only through an understanding of the feelings of love possessed by our distant ancestors, the philosophy of their love. The further back you manage to go with your thought, the more you will be able to make sense of the rite. To be more thoroughly persuaded of the truth of what Anastasia's grandfather had said regarding archaeum, let us take a look at its architecture. Archaeum has the form of a circle with an exterior diameter of approximately 160 meters. As you can see, that's rather small for a city, but I shall still call it a city, as scholars at the moment are doing. It is surrounded by a 2-meter wide perimeter trench outside a massive exterior wall. The wall was 5.5 meters high and 5 meters thick. There were 4 entrances in the wall, the largest facing southwest. The other 3 were smaller, located on opposite sides. Footnote, which would be northeast, northwest, and southeast. All the entrances led directly in to the only ring road, about 5 meters wide, which separated the dwellings attached to the outer wall from the inner rings of walls. This ring road was covered with logs, under which, for the whole length of the street, ran a dugout 2-meter wide ditch which connected with a perimeter trench. Thus, the city had its own storm drainage system. Surplus water would seep through the logs into the ditch and eventually into the perimeter trench. All the dwellings attached to the outer wall, like lemon sections, had doorways on the main street. No more than 35 dwellings were discovered around the outer circle. That's not much, even for a village. Next, we see the mysterious ring of the inner wall, which was even more massive than the outer one. 3 meters thick, they reached a height of 7 meters. According to the excavation findings, there was no entrance through this wall except for a small passageway at the southeast point. Hence another 25 interior dwellings, identical to those around the outer perimeter wall, were practically cut off from everything by the thick, high inner wall. In order to reach the little passageway to the inner ring, one had to travel the whole length of the ring road. This had a hidden significance. Anyone entering the city had to travel the same path as the sun, with a capital S. Finally, Archaim was crowned by a central plaza almost square in shape, approximately 25 by 27 meters. Judging by the traces of fire spread out in a particular pattern, this plaza was used for some kind of rites. Thus we see the schematic figure of a mandala, a square inside a circle. In ancient cosmogonic texts, the circle symbolizes the universe, the square, the earth, our material world. Ancient men of wisdom who had perfect knowledge of the structure of the cosmos saw how naturally and harmoniously it was constructed. And so, in building a city, it was like recreating the universe in miniature. Archaim was built according to a predetermined plan as a single complex whole, W-H-O-L-E, oriented with extreme precision to celestial bodies. The design resulting from the 4 entrances in Archaim's outer walls forms a right-facing swastika, reflecting the clockwise movement of the sun. The swastika in Sanskrit, connected with good, the best success, is one of the most ancient sacred symbols. It is encountered as far back as the Upper Paleolithic period in the cultures of many of the world's peoples, including those of India, ancient Rus, China, and Egypt, as well as of the mysterious Mayan people in Central America, to name but a few. The swastika may be seen in old Orthodox icons. It is the correct symbol of the sun, success, happiness, and creativity. Correspondingly, a backwards left-facing swastika symbolizes darkness and destruction. The nighttime sun of the dwellers of ancient Rus. Footnotes. Cosmogonic, relating to cosmogony, the astrophysical study or theory or model of the origin and evolution of the universe. Clockwise movement of the sun, that is, as seen from the northern hemisphere. And Upper Paleolithic period, a period of between 40,000 and 10,000 years ago, also known as the Late Stone Age, particularly in reference to Africa, before the advent of agriculture. Both swastikas were used, as may be seen on ancient ornaments, in particular on the Aryan jars found around Archaim. This has a deep significance. Day takes the place of night, light the place of darkness, and a new birth takes place of death. This is the natural order of things in the universe. Hence, in antiquity, there was no such thing as a good or bad swastika. They were perceived as a unified entity, like the energy of yin and yang in the Orient. Archaim was outwardly beautiful, the ideal circular city marked by distinctive gate towers, burning torches, and a beautifully formed facade, probably featuring some kind of meaningful sacral pattern. Everything in Archaim, after all, was fraught with meaning. Each dwelling was attached on one side to either the outer or inner wall and faced either the main ring road or the central plaza. In the improvised entrance hall to each dwelling was a special watercourse which emptied into the ditch under the main street. The ancient Aryans were thus provided with a sewer system. Not only that, but each dwelling had its own well, furnace, and a small cupola-shaped storage area. From each well above the water level, 2 earthen pipes branched out. One led to the furnace, the other to the storage area. What for? Quite brilliant, actually. We all know that if you glance down a well, you will invariably feel a current of cool air. So in the Aryan furnaces, this cool air passing through the earthen pipe created such a strong draft that it was capable of melting bronze with no need for bellows. There was a furnace like that in every dwelling, and all the ancient blacksmiths had to do was to perfect their craft and compete with their artistic rivals. The other earthen pipe leading to the storage area ensured a lower temperature there. The famous Russian archaeologist Konstantinovich Bystrushkin researched Archaim as an astronomical observatory and came to the following conclusion. Archaim is not just a complex installation, but it is subtle in its complexity. In examining its schematics, one can easily see parallels with the well-known Stonehenge monument in England. For example, the diameter of the inner circle of Archaim is always reported as being exactly 85 meters. In fact, it is a circle with 2 radiuses, 40 meters and 43.2 meters. Try drawing it. Compare that to the radius of Stonehenge's Aubrey hole ring, which is also 43.2 meters. Footnote: Aubrey hole ring, a ring of 56 pits or holes, thought to have held posts, forming a timber circle named after the poet and antiquary John Aubrey, 1626 to 1697, who discovered them in the 17th century. Stonehenge and Archaim are positioned at approximately the same latitude, and both are at the center of a bowl-shaped valley. The distance between them is almost 4,000 kilometers. Researchers have determined that on the basis of all the known facts, Archaim amounts to a horizon observatory. Why a horizon observatory specifically? Because the measurings and observations made there are based on the moment of the rising and setting of the sun and the moon on the horizon. The recording of the moment of disengagement, or touchdown, of the lower edge of the disk on the horizon allows the accurate determination of the place of this event. If we keep track of sunrises on a daily basis, we shall note that the actual point of the sunrise shifts from day to day, reaching its northern limit on the 22nd of June. This point then moves south to its opposite apogee on the 22nd of December. This is part of the cosmic order. That means there are 4 visible points of observation of the sun each year. 2 points of sunrise on June 22nd and December 22nd, and 2 corresponding points of sunset on the western horizon. Add to these 2 more points, namely the sunrise and sunset during the equinox, March 22nd and September 22nd. This offered a sufficiently accurate determination of the length of a year. However, a year is made up of a whole host of singular events, and these can be determined with the aid of that other celestial body, namely the moon. Regardless of the complexity involved in its observation, people of old knew that the laws of its movement across the empyrean. Here are a few of them. 1. The full moon, which occurs closest to June 22nd, is observed at the point of the winter solstice, December 22nd, and vice versa. 2. Lunar events can be observed near the points of the solstice on a 19-year cycle, high and low moon. As an observatory, Arcane allowed astronomers to follow the events of the moon. It is possible to note 18 astronomical events just on these huge circular walls alone. 6 of them are connected with the sun, and 12 with the moon, including the high and low moon. By comparison, researchers at Stonehenge were able to identify only 15 cosmic events. In addition to information about these amazing factual events, the following data were obtained. The arcane unit of measurement of length is 80 centimeters. The center of the inner circle shows a displacement from the center of the outer circle by a factor of 5.25 arcane units, which is close to the moon's orbital inclination. 5 degrees 9 inches? Feet? Shit. It has 1 apostrophe. I think that means feet. Oh my god, my ignorance is showing. Plus or minus 10 minutes. In by Strushkin's opinion, this reflects the correlation between the orbits of the moon and the sun for the terrestrial observer. Correspondingly, Arcane's outer circle is dedicated to the moon, its inner circle of the sun, to the sun. Not only that, but astroarchaeological measurements have been shown a link between some of Arcane's parameters and the wobbling of the Earth's axis. This is getting into some pretty sophisticated science, even in terms of modern astronomy. And so we see that by any stretch of the imagination, Arcane hardly falls under the category of city. Its extremely small rooms offer no accommodation for families, but serve as an ideal space for philosophical reflections. Historians know that in ancient times, so-called wise men were considered to be scientists and teachers. Consequently, it is possible that Arcane, as one of the most celebrated scientific centers, could have belonged exclusively to these wise men. There were simply no other scientists around in those times. It is also known that the wise men devised and adjusted their rites on the basis of their knowledge of the cosmos. The question is, what has become of these unique rites today? What kind of obscurantism has destroyed them or is concealing them from people's view? What is the message of Sungir? Sungir. And now I should like to bring to your attention some even more sensational news eclipsing that of even the pyramids of Egypt or the ruins of ancient Rome. This information is also needed, as Anastasia's grandfather said, in order to better understand the phenomena and knowledge of the universe prevalent in our ancient forebears' time. And for that, we have to delve as deeply as possible into history. The Siberian recluse said, furthermore, if your thought can dig down to 3,000 years ago, you will begin to gradually feel the knowledge of 3 millennia. If it can go as deep as 5,000 years, then 5 millennia, though not everything you discover will be... What? If it can go as deep as 5,000 years, then 5 millennia, though not everything you discover will be comprehensible to you. You actually need a minimum of 19,000 years. This attempt to dig into our country's historical past seemed to me utterly unfeasible. I was already prepared to go off to India or Tibet, where, as it is said, one can learn more about our ancestors than here at home. But as it turned out, there was no need to go anywhere. Everything was available right here, and now I invite everyone reading these lines to cast his thought about our forebears more than 19,000 years back in time. The archaeological finds I am about to describe were made by mere chance on the outskirts of the city of Vladimir, which, according to official sources, is approximately 1,015 years old. In 1955, while excavating a clay pit mine for the Vladimir ceramics factory, Alexander F. Nacharov discovered in one of the buckets the bones of some very large animal, which had been resting at the depths of 3 meters. Archaeologists were informed about the discovery. The first excavations thereafter simply astounded the scientists. Buried on the site were the remains of people, jewelry, clothing, ornamentation, and everyday objects, all testifying to some kind of ancient culture. Further investigation confirmed that our ancestors had arrived on the banks of Klyazma River as early as the Stone Age, approximately 25,000 years ago. Klyazma River, a tributary of the Oka, which in turn flows into the Volga at the Nizhny Novgorod east of Moscow. Vladimir is one of the major cities on the banks of the Klyazma. Now, somebody could be wondering whether they might have run about on all fours, dressed in homemade skins and carrying clubs. Not at all. The scientists were amazed by another finding. On the skeletons themselves, or close by, were a whole lot of jewelry and ornaments which aided in reconstructing the appearance of the clothing worn by these ancient people, something similar to either overalls or a perfectly civilized dress. The finding is such that if we are not going to relegate these remains to the category of buried extraterrestrials, then we shall have to completely revise our whole historical outlook on the world. In one of its halls, the Vladimir State Museum of History and the Ethnography mounted a special exhibition dedicated to these unique findings. It put out a booklet stating that the Sungir site is the most interesting archaeological monument in Russia and is known to archaeologists all over the world. It has hosted a number of international scientific conferences. Sungir presented one of the northernmost settlements of ancient man in the Vladimir region on the Great Russian Plain. In terms of richness of both subjects and state of preservation of such ancient remains, it has no compeer anywhere in the world. Thanks to the collaborative efforts of archaeologists, geologists, paleontologists, and paleobotanists, we have a fairly clear picture of how people lived back then in this incredibly distant time period. Here on the edge of a glacier was where the tundra used to begin, dotted here and there with islands of fir, pine, birch, and alder groves. The animal world was quite diversified. According to the booklet, ancient Sungarians hunted the reindeer, wild horse, Arctic fox, wolverine, bison, brown bear, wolf, Arctic hare, and they also went after the black grouse, jungle fowl, and herring gull. And of course, they hunted the mammoth, a huge animal now extinct, almost 4 meters tall and weighing 6 tons. This represented for them a much sought-after trophy. Meat, skins indispensable in construction dwellings, and tusks, a solid and superb material for the preparation of both weapons and ornaments. The inventory of objects made from bone and horn is most interesting. Shaft adjusters, hoes, spearheads, arrowheads, and beads from mammoth tusks, jewelry made from the fangs of the Arctic fox. A small silhouetted figure of a large-headed horse came to be recognized as a rare example of primitive art. This famous Sangir horse was decorated with tiny dotted ornaments and red ochre, O-C-H-R-E. The number of dots on the figure, a multiple of 5, testifies to the use of a quinary counting system among inhabitants of the site. A 7-based system points to the knowledge possessed by people living 25,000 years ago, but it is the unique burial sites of the ancient people that have brought global fame to Sangir. In 1964, in a heavy layer of ochre-colored rock was found the skull of a woman. Lower still were the remains of an elderly man. On his chest was a pendant made from a pebble, while on his arms were about 25 plate bracelets made from mammoth tusks. In addition, on the skull, all along the arms, patterns of their arrangement, all along the arms, legs, and torso, almost 3,500 beads were arranged in rows. The pattern of their arrangement on the skeleton allowed the scientists to reconstruct the embroidered costume of this ancient Sangirian. It was reminiscent of the fur clothing worn by Arctic peoples today. At the bottom of the shallow grave, they discovered a knife and some kind of scraper made of flint. Just as much a treasure was the next burial site unearthed some 5 years later. The grave contained the remains of an adult body, but without a skull. Beside it lay a necklace of mammoth tusk beads, a ring, and a pair of reindeer antlers. But further back, at 65 centimeters below the upper grave, were found 2 skeletons of children. A boy of 12 or 13 and a girl between 7 and 9 had been placed in the grave in a stretched position, their heads pressed tightly against each other. Children on their way to the next world were accompanied by hunting weapons made from mammoth tusks, 11 darts, 13 daggers, and 2 spears made out of split and straightened tusks, one 2.5 meters and the other 1.5 meters long. The grave also yielded mammoth tusk rods, very expressive figurines of a horse and a mammoth, carved discs of an apparently ceremonial nature, and connected with the worship of the sun and the moon. The children's clothing, too, was embroidered with thousands of little beads, fastened across the chest with pins made of bones. The back of the costume had been outfitted with threads of beads in the shape of animal tails. This finding testifies to the complex rite of burial and the developed religious beliefs of the ancient people of the Stone Age. One may confidently assume that they believed in the afterlife. Multidisciplinary archaeological investigations have been going on at Sangir, with a few interruptions, ever since 1956. For almost 20 years, the project was under the supervision of the most famous archaeologist, Dr. Otto Nikolaevich Bader. There's a footnote, but I don't care. Anthropologist M.M. Gerasimov, also a footnote, but I don't care, along with his students, G.V. Lebedinskaya, also has a footnote, but I don't care, and T.S. Cernina, succeeded in reconstructing the external appearance of the ancient Sangirians. As is known, anthropologists are often able to reconstruct a person's face with sufficient accuracy on the basis of the skull. This offered a rare opportunity indeed to gaze upon the faces of ancient people, an opportunity I decided to take advantage of. A wise, intelligent-looking face on the adult male, a slightly sad expression on the young girl's face and a thoughtful one on the boy's. And yet the presumptions about hunting, and especially the mammoth, I believe, were not entirely accurate. I brought Anastasia's grandfather to this unique exhibition in the Vladimir Museum. The old fellow slowly made his way around the displays without stopping at any of them. Then he stood in the middle of the hall and bowed 4 times, each time shifting his position by 90 degrees. When I told him about the scientists' conclusions, he began to refute a good deal of it, explaining, "These people, Vladimir, never hunted mammoths. Mammoths were their household animals, and a very great help to families, also a way of transporting heavy loads. They performed a greater variety of tasks than elephants do today in India, which are controlled by mahouts, or drivers. Standing on a mammoth, the Sungarians could gather fruit from very tall trees and store them in woven bags and baskets, and then carry them to wherever they liked. In the domain glades, the mammoths cleared out young underbrush from the forest, encroaching on the glades, or, depending on the task assigned, would shake, then pull up the trees so as to enlarge the glade. Whenever people had to move from one place to another, they would load their belongings, utensils, and food supplies onto the mammoth. This was a very kind and industrious household animal. Even a small child could put his fingers around the end of its trunk and lead it about at will. Indeed, children often played with the mammoth, making it suck up water into its trunk and then giving them a shower. The mammoth took great pleasure in watching how the youngsters jumped and squealed with joy. The mammoth was especially delighted, too, when his wool was combed out and removed by a special rake-like instrument. Man would wash the wool, dry it, and then use it for his own purposes, for example, in making a bed. There was absolutely no need for these people to hunt the mammoth. This can be deduced just from the information available in the booklet, which contains quite a few contradictory statements. Why contradictory? Think about it. They list all sorts of wild game which could easily be caught in sufficient numbers with the aid of special traps. If a man killed a mammoth, which weighs 6 tons, he could not possibly eat all of its meat right off. But what if there were a whole lot of people? There could not have been that many. Back in those times, people didn't live packed tight together the way they do now in cities or towns. Each family tribe had its own lands. Each family had their own territory, their own home. On an area of 3 square kilometers might be living fewer than 100 people. Even collectively, they couldn't eat a 6-ton mammoth in just a few days, even if they didn't consume anything but meat during that time. The rotting meat would start to decompose and attract a large number of insects. Wow. It could have started an epidemic. But maybe they invited people from other territories to some kind of feast. What sense would there be in traveling several kilometers just to eat meat which there was enough of at home? But if you say the mammoth's decomposing carcass could run the risk of provoking an epidemic, the very same threat could be posed by a household mammoth when it died. Vladimir, a mammoth would never die in the family surroundings. When it got old and felt death approaching, it would walk a little ways from the house and trumpet 3 times before heading off to a cemetery for mammoths, where it died. You should have known that yourself. That is what wild elephants do today in India. Before they die, they trumpet and they leave the herd. So that means we have a very distorted understanding of how the ancient people fed themselves? Yes, that's right. Perhaps it's an attempt to justify your current barbarity in regard to the treatment of animals. The farther you go back into history, the fewer people that you will encounter eating meat. They had a sufficient supply of growing things to sustain them. As for animals, they took from them only what the animals themselves gave to man. Milk and eggs, for example. Meat could have been harmful to the stomachs of the first people. Another argument in favor of the premise that hunting was not a basic source of food for primitive people. Okay, I'm sorry, I need to read that again. Another argument in favor of the premise that hunting was not a basic source of food for the primitive people is its illogicality by comparison with other ways of obtaining food. What other ways? From tamed, domesticated animals. Picture to yourself a man whose household includes a female mammoth, a cow, and a goat, all of which can be milked, yielding a daily supply of top-quality fresh produce. This man's household also includes domesticated fowl, a goose, a duck, a chicken, all of which provide eggs with little effort on his part. He has the opportunity of gathering honey and pollen from bees, and a great many root vegetables and edible herbs are also at hand. Then all of a sudden it appears as though the man is going out of his mind. He kills all of his domestic animals, which, apart from everything else, have also been guarding him when he is asleep. He eats them and begins hunting for wild game, thereby putting himself in danger without guaranteeing himself and his family a regular supply of fresh produce. In place of friendly surroundings and the love expressed to him by his household animals, he ends up with nothing but an aggressive environment in which it is virtually impossible, one might say, for his household to survive. But did the first people really begin right off to domesticate and train their animals? Might that have come along at a later period? There would have been no later period for man if he had taken an aggressive stance from the start. You must be acquainted, after all, Vladimir, with the situations where an infant alone in the forest may be fed by even by carnivorous wolves, the very same forest where a pack of wolves could tear an adult to pieces. What would account for the discrepancy in their attitude towards man? I can't really say. Because in the first instance, the infant man has no aggression, while in the second, we have aggression and fear which create unease in the surrounding environment. The first people had no sense of fear or aggression. It was love that was dominant in them, along with a genuine interest in the world around them. Consequently, it was no effort to domesticate or train animals and birds. Their primary concern was to determine the purpose of every creature they encountered on the earth. This they did. As far as the animals go, you already know that they found their own highest benefit in man's feelings of love and care for them. Meat was first consumed by a less than complete man, one drained of the energy of love. It seems that he either went out of his mind or was infected with the most terrible disease, a disease which has come down to the present day. But what connection can there be between love and man's first consumption of meat? There is a direct connection. A man living in love is incapable of killing. Possibly, but can you determine why these children died 25,000 years ago? Why were they buried in such an unusual manner, head to head like that? And my question, this is Carla speaking now, I'm like, okay, they had all these tusks and bones and stuff, like, did they go get them from the graveyard, or, like, okay, I could tell you, of course, but it would be a very long story. Besides, it is not important for you to know why they were overcome by death, but for what purpose? For what purpose? There you go again, Vladimir, constantly asking questions. Too lazy to think for yourself. Only don't blame me for speaking like this, the way you did back in the taiga when you let resentment take over. Think instead on the whole point of my telling you things. What I say will bring you more harm than good if you don't begin to think for yourself. I speak and you listen, and instead of working out your own conclusions in your thought, You are merely taking note of mine. You have set yourself up a goal of finding conditions in the past under which love could remain with people forever, then reintroducing them in this present day. That's fine, the path is correct, and the goal is the most important of all. You are trying to determine how many ages ago love began to dwell with people. Look, here is a date right before your eyes. Think about it. Right in front of you lie 2 children's skeletons. Their death at such a young age is meaningless unless people can realize what important information is concealed in their burial. Their death will acquire meaning if you retrieve this information right now. I didn't resent the old fellow for his remark on my laziness of mind. I had long realized that he was using some kind of methods of his own, trying again and again to teach me how to control my thoughts by alternative means. But I, after all, did not go through the same school as they, training their thought from childhood. I went to an ordinary school, which quite possibly serves to do just the opposite, to switch thought off. So here I am standing in front of these child skeletons, straining myself mentally, without being able to grasp how I can look on them and learn at least something about the love that existed 25,000 years ago. If it existed at all at that time. It did exist, the old fellow suddenly said. What made you decide that? There's not a word about love on the museum signs. Not a word, but so what? Look carefully. Judging by the skeletons, these are children. The boy is 12 and a half, and the girl is 8. On their skeletons are hundreds of bone beads. On the basis of their arrangement, your scientists have determined what kind of clothing the children were wearing. But is that all the bone beads can tell us? What else can they tell us? That their parents, Vladimir, loved these children very much. They loved their children, and they loved each other. Only loving parents could get involved in such time-consuming ornamentation of their children's clothing. We can also tell that they had more than enough free time for artistic pursuits and for designing and then making fine clothing. Note that the objects found in the grave included absolutely no weapons capable of killing. What about the darts? Aren't those weapons? Of course not. They're not even harpoons for catching fish, since there are no barbs on the end. The end of the objects, they've called a dart, is not even sharp. A thin, lightweight dart that could hardly kill or even wound any creature. Then what was this object used for? For training and controlling animals. See how it resembles a stick animal trainers use today. Elephant drivers, for example, use sticks like that to control their charges. But why did they need to make them out of bone? They could have taken a real stick and not wasted time trying to straighten out the bone and putting ornaments onto it. A wooden stick would not last very long. Animals, on the other hand, get accustomed to a single object. Its shape, even its smell, acquires from contact with the master's hand. Right then, everything you say sounds rather convincing, but there are other objects which resemble arrowheads, and arrows were meant for killing. In the case of these specific people, who are not of the very earliest period of human life on the earth, arrows were intended for scaring away carnivorous beasts when they attacked. There are some objects that look like hoes. These indeed were instruments for planting seeds and digging up roots. But the jewelry? Look, this necklace is made from the fangs of an Arctic fox, and scientists assume that the clothing was made from leather, so they killed animals after all. Your scientists are right about their clothing being made of leather, but there was absolutely no need to kill any animals for this purpose. There were reptiles which shed their old skin on a regular basis. Reptiles might die for some reason, and then the ants would eat their insides, leaving the skin untouched, which turned out to be very useful for making clothing. Given such circumstances, it would be silly to waste time on killing an animal, cutting up the carcass, processing it, and drying the skin or softening it. What for? Since it was possible to acquire a ready-made skin in an ideal condition, in the divine nature all man's needs have been provided for in advance. As for the necklace from the fox's fangs, it was a lot simpler to take them from a skeleton already worked over and dried by nature. At this point, I'm going to interrupt for a moment Anastasia's grandfather's account about the archaeologist's unique findings. In the booklet put out by the Vladimir State Museum, there are drawings showing two exhibit halls, the Sanjir Architectural Park and the Sanjir Museum Complex. It mentions that international conferences have been organized around these unique findings. However, I would not advise any great haste to visit the excavation site of this ancient civilization. There are no actual pavilions on the site, only the remains of unfinished construction. And the archaeological work is not proceeding at any intensive pace. The state has no funds for such important projects. They are going ahead, one might say, thanks to the level of enthusiasm both of the scientists involved and of the local authorities. I arrived at this unique place on a weekend. In one of the pits, I saw two men taking soil samples from the side of the pit and carefully placing them into plastic bags. They turned out to be workers from the State Archaeological Institute. They confirmed that Sanjir is considered the richest archaeological site for the study of ancient man anywhere in the world. Then the Vladimir Museum exhibition is only one of its kind in Russia, is the only one of its kind. They said that tourists sometimes visited the Sanjir excavation site, but mainly tourists from Japan, since there is an even fuller exhibition on Sanjir at the Tokyo National Archaeological Museum. It seemed pretty strange that the people in the land of the rising sun show more respect to our ancient forebears living on our country's territory than we do ourselves. Thank you, Japanese friends, for protecting the culture of our joint forebears. We talk about Russia's lofty mission, about spirituality, and the need to support the national image, but what support can we talk about if foreign tourists see our relationship to history through their own eyes? Well, the only thing we can do is hope that possibly our more civilized descendants will learn what secrets still remain to be discovered in Sanjir. I managed to find out that 25,000 years ago, our forebears were civilized people who knew how to love passionately and preserve love forever.